Julie, I'm going to look on my computer next to me to make sure. Yeah, we're live. Here we are. I always do that high-pitched little yelp when I we're live. Okay, I think we're live. All right. Now I can look at people's questions too, which is great. All right. So, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lucy McBride, internal medicine physician in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Wait a minute.
What? Is that working?
I'm gonna turn that off because I'm getting a double. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, just turn your volume down on your. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Lucy McBride, internal medicine doctor, and joining me today, I'm thrilled to have Julie Barron, who is a licensed clinical social worker and pro in parenting and managing the social emotional health of teenagers. Julie is going to help answer some questions from you guys live and also talk generally about the emotional toll that the pandemic has taken on our youngsters. So Julie, welcome, and please introduce yourself more, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be with you, Lucy. And we'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I have been working with teens and families for almost 28 years now in a variety of settings, and for the last 15 years in private practice. I see adolescents, young adults, and adults, and feel like I've really been in the thick of it with helping people cope right now through this pandemic. I'm also the mother of 2 teenagers, so I'm in the thick of it with everybody else who's trying to-
You're living it and breathing it.
Yes, living it and breathing it. It is, my 2 worlds have finally collided. Which, you know, as for everything, there are pros and cons. So I'm thrilled to be with you and happy to answer questions and give any guidance.
So I'm going to just ask you some questions first up. So Julie, tell me what sort of, I mean, this is a broad question, but tell me what the main things, like what's the theme of what a lot of kids are coming to talk about in their sessions with you? And obviously you can't breach confidentiality, you can't talk about any specific patient, but if you had to sort of talk about themes that are coming up in teenage patients, what would you say those are?
I mean, more broadly, and really even before the pandemic, depression and anxiety are the 2, you know, ones at the top for sure. And, you know, in all honesty, I think that my work has shifted a little bit in terms of trying to do some more problem solving about how kids are managing this new normal and the time and the structure and just not knowing. And I'll give some strategies about managing uncertainty, because that's a lot of what I'm doing. Anxiety its underpinnings are about the worries of uncertainty and not being able to know what's going to happen. And so, which is pretty much what defines our existence at the moment. And also I will say that, you know, for some people they're better, and for some people they're not better, and for some worse. So it really kind of runs the gamut. For the kids who, for whom school and social and just all kind of academic stress and the hyper-functioning nature of our culture, which I hope we'll have a chance to talk about as well, just was a lot. Like, they're all just running on fumes. And, you know, they're now sleeping. They get to sleep, and that's been huge to see. You know, there are a percentage for whom mood has improved because they're getting better sleep.
And you hope that, not to interrupt you, but you hope that those kiddos and their parents are taking note of what in their lives has made an improvement. Like, is it more sleep? Is it more downtime? Is it not being overscheduled? Is it the social anxiety they never had identified they had before? Because it is, for some kids, as you said, an opportunity to reflect on how the pandemic has slowed us down and offered an opportunity to think about those things.
Yes, it's all of the above. It's all of those things. You know, I mean, I know, like, for my own kids, they're not academians. They don't love sitting in a classroom and sitting all day long, as, you know, many kids don't. And, especially kids who have ADHD, executive functioning, being able to have more flexibility to move around through their day and do their work on their own terms. And also, really depending, I think, on where your teen is in school. I think the private schools really have structured things differently and more in terms of additional structure than the public schools have. The public schools have done more, here's what you need to do each week, go to it, do it, turn it in, check in if you need to. Private schools, I think, have done more keeping a structure of classes throughout the day on Zoom and really having more kind of video direct check-in. And so, but overall, because I see kids in all of these places, in all of these school settings, in my practice, the workload across the board is less. And I think it just needs to be by virtue of, how this is all working and how this is structured. And I think the teachers are doing a great job and working really, really hard to keep these kids as engaged as possible and to create, an educational experience that is as positive as it can be. But so there are ups and downs. There are pros and cons to this, I think, for a lot of kids.
So if you had,
I will say about the kids who are dealing really with more depression is this is relevant to your post from the other day on the stages of grief.
Yeah.
Particularly our seniors and
yes.
are transitioning and coming up on endings. They got the rug pulled out from under them. And I am seeing the stages of grief. For sure.
Yeah, I think that, as you said, Julie, it really seems to depend on the kid, as we know, and the same applies for adults. Adults have the same set of emotions that kids do, and everybody's managing them differently, and everyone's experiencing the pandemic differently. Mm-hmm. In my adult patients, on the anxiety front, it's all about uncertainty and the unknown, mm-hmm. right? People who have anxiety at baseline, which is, as you know, a large population of people, are particularly affected by, the fact that there's an invisible threat. So that mm-hmm. makes it stressful and uniquely traumatizing. Mm-hmm. We have no end in sight. There's mm-hmm. no sort of end point. Even though states are opening, that doesn't mean it's safe to be outside and do, your normal life. And then the fact that you've lost all these parts of your life and don't know when your life is going to come back. All these things are extremely anxiety producing, not to mention the fear of getting sick yourself or infecting someone else accidentally. So, anxiety in my patient population, and as we see around the world, and it was reported as recently as yesterday in the Washington Post, our country is experiencing this shadow pandemic of mental health. Mm-hmm. And so on the mood front, I'm seeing people experiencing loss, whether it's a death of a loved one or just the inability to hug grandkids. And then on the teenager side, because I do see adolescents as well, it's the loss of the routine. Mm-hmm. It's the loss of the social interaction. For kids and for adults, but for kids we're talking about today, that ability to interact with peers is so important and so much a part of their development and their education mm-hmm. and their self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And pulling that away, I think for some kids, like you said, who are maybe more introverted and overwhelmed, it can be a boon to have more time alone and to reflect. But for so many kids I'm talking to, and I know you are too, it's extremely devastating to not be able to see their friends and to look down the barrel of a summer mm-hmm. of hot, sweaty aloneness. Yeah. It's terrifying.
Absolutely. And look, this stage of development during adolescence, teenagers are supposed to be with their peer group. They're supposed to be, learning themselves through social interactions and social communities.
Right.
While they're doing it still kind of online, it's not the same. It's not the same as I was talking to, a client recently who is a graduating senior, and, it's this sense of like, but we're not all together as a whole school community. And you can't, if you have a school community of hundreds of kids in a graduating class, the kids aren't all friends with each other, but there's something about feeling held by the presence of everyone.
That's it.
That is just missing for them at this point. And it's really, it's really hard. And the uncertainty is really hard. And
so what are you telling your kiddos? I mean, what if you're a parent out there listening to us talk and, noticing that your kid seems more withdrawn, down, blue, sort of mourning the loss overtly, or just exhibiting symptoms of mourning without them saying anything, what are you telling parents and what are you telling kids? What are some tips you're telling them? And of course it depends on the individual and it depends on the severity of the situation. But what are some things we can tell our youngsters to make them feel at least temporarily better?
Well, so let me speak to this sense of uncertainty and then some strategies around how to manage that. Tolerating uncertainty is a really important life skill. We don't realize it, but being able to weather things that catch us off guard, because life will do that. Life will throw curveballs. And it is not about, I think we collect as adults, as parents, spend a lot of time, trying to protect our kids and make sure that they have the best experience they can have. And so while it's really painful and it's really hard, there also is a value in allowing what is to be what is. And so in this skill of sort of how to practice tolerating uncertainty, there's really 4 things that we can do. And the first one, it really starts with acceptance. And there is this concept actually of radical acceptance, which is I
love that expression. It's so
right.
It's a wonderful thing because it implies exactly what it is, which is, how hard it is to accept things sometimes, but if you can radically do it. So keep going.
Yeah. So there's and radical acceptance is a thing and a concept. And if anybody, reads Tara Brach's stuff, she has a whole book on radical acceptance.
That's right.
It's like a whole concept, right? But it really is this the body language of it is okay, uncle, I get, you have to give yourself to it really to be 100% in this, there's this part I can do nothing about. And so we have to be able to accept what is. And when we don't accept what is, accepting what is painful. But when we don't accept what is, we suffer. And so your choice is between tolerating pain or enduring suffering that doesn't have to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that is the motivation for acceptance in moments like this, where it's really hard and we wouldn't have wished it or wanted it. And, it's unfair and all the rest. But the other
so that's step 1 is radical acceptance.
Really accepting
and what is.
Correct. Also,
and can I just say too that when parents, I obviously this, Julie, but I'll just say it out loud. When parents are able to themselves accept what is, accept uncertainty, accept they can't control certain outcomes, accept that there's sort of no right or wrong answer in a situation, then I think kids are better able to accept it as well. Would you say that's fair?
For sure. Absolutely. There is an incredible modeling opportunity for us as parents right now. I mean, this is up close and personal and way more, close contact. We sort of missed our kids and wished we would see them more and be careful what you wish for, because now we're all on top of each other.
And they're watching us all the time.
But they're right, exactly.
And as we're doing a lot of things as parents that we, are not perfect, that are not things we want kids to emulate. But when you have the chance, I think, to demonstrate to your kids and even verbalize it ideally that, this is a tough time and this is, really, really rotten to have this reality that no one wished for, that is causing people to be sick, and we have no control over our future. But you know what? We just got to accept it.
Yeah. And
I think kids hearing that, it can help move things along and help offer some sort of solidarity.
The piece that makes it, if we ask ourselves really, why is it so hard to accept it? And the thing that is really hard is tolerating difficult emotions. And so accepting and tolerating distress all of the emotions. This is not about making your kids feel better. This is about reading them authentically, like taking a real read of what they're feeling and allowing them to have that and to validate it. And I always say, like, if you want the biggest bang for your buck as far as like a parenting strategy, it's validating your kid. Before we start problem solving, which, you know, for those of us who know we're really good problem solvers, there's like an urge to jump in and try to fix and problem solve. We just need to let it be. We need to let the feelings exist and say it makes sense. It's understandable. You
That's
get
great.
to, you know.
So you were saying there are 4 steps. One is the radical acceptance.
One is acceptance and tolerating emotions and like accepting the emotional experience within that is part of acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Second is do what you can do. All you can do is what you can do. So take the things you do have control over, like planning your day, who you want to be in touch with, what you want your goals to be, what you want to focus on, how you spend your time, how you take care of yourself, all of those things, right? Getting the information that you can get and access and use that is the other piece, is really, instead of putting your attention on the things we don't have control over, really ask yourself, okay, given what is, what can I control? And that's where we put our focus.
Right. And then as the serenity prayer would say, know the difference, right?
Correct.
Because a lot of the problem lies in trying to control the things that are uncontrollable. So
which also creates suffering.
Right. It creates suffering when, okay, I mean, this is a classic example. It's like, okay, we're in a pandemic. I can't control the fact that the kids are out of school. I can't control the fact that my kid is popping into my Zoom call and they're cranky and I can't even plan my dinner, not to mention, you know, the end of the week. And so I'm going to try to, as a parent, like go on a diet, or I'm going to try to, you know, clean the entire house by the end of the month. I mean,
right. Pick a project, piece it out, piece by.
What I'm saying is the diet is not what I'm saying. Like, in other words, like, don't try to do things that you actually cannot do. Right.
Right. Exactly.
So what I'm saying is, and maybe you can clean the house in an entire by the end of the month, but what I'm saying is pick the things that you can control and be honest with yourself about what you can control. Because sometimes we try to control things when the world feels out of control, they're uncontrollable. So it's important you know what you can. Yeah.
And you know, those things you mentioned are big things that are not realistic to tackle like all at once.
Right.
Like the things that are within our control is where we need to place our attention. And then we will generate emotions around productivity and building mastery. And those emotions are more pleasant and tolerable than, you know, frustration and despair. And again, there's a place for the emotions that go along with it, with all of this. So it's a little bit of this like dialectical balancing of validate and acknowledge what is, and then pivot and switch to doing what you can do. And in order to be able to do that well, we have to stay present moment. So there's only so much planning that we can really do with the amount of information that we have.
That's right. It's like, you know, the whole mindfulness concept, which is an essential one. And, you know, some people say, oh, it's so trendy. Well, it's a 3,000-year-old trend for a reason, right? The concept being of not dwelling in the past and thinking what you shoulda, coulda, woulda, and not looking at the future, particularly right now when we have no idea what the future holds. And it just can breed anxiety when you try to plan something that's not plannable, but rather to be in the moment, to literally drill down into the 5 senses or your 6 senses and figure out, you know, how do you feel? What's the temperature in the room? How do my pant legs feel against my skin? You know, all just sort of just being very, very present. And so it's in a weird way an opportunity to do that because we kind of have no choice. We have to only deal with the present right now. I mean, we all can't plan for the summer, so might as well just focus on what you have right this minute. Exactly.
And I mean, the next piece is to really focus on the positive, right? So all set scenarios and all uncertainty there's an upside, right? So in every situation, there's sort of an upside downside to everything. And so tolerating the uncertainty of something of like, okay, I wouldn't have wished, like, for example, what we were talking about earlier, I would never in a million years have wished for this to happen. But, my kid's actually more rested. So like, it helps to find those little nuggets where we can, so that it's the uncertainty is not like completely overtaken by only anxiety.
That's right.
And so those are the 4 things: acceptance, focus on what you can do, stay present moment, and focus on the positives.
I think that's so great. And I think, back to what we were talking about earlier, as someone who sees adults, I'm encouraging adults to do the same thing. And I think the more we can do that ourselves, and the more we can model those 4 things in the presence of our kids, and they are in our presence all the time, the better we'll all be. I think it's very easy to get kind of caught up in the contagion of the mood du jour at home. I have 3 teenagers myself, and it's sometimes very hard not to ride the roller coaster of one person's emotion, and to, as a parent, to internalize their feelings. But I think what's important is, in the spirit of mindfulness, is to step away from, not from step away from your child, but step away from their emotions, and use your rational brain to think, okay, here's a kid who's a wonderful kid who's struggling. Let's go through those 4 things that you just went through, Julie, for myself, and let's try to help bring them back into their rational selves as well. And it's not always going to work, and we have to forgive ourselves for not always being model parents, and forgive ourselves for riding the roller coaster of our kids' emotions, which we do, because I think, as you said earlier, we're wired to protect. But to the extent you can step away and have a little distance from your own emotions, and step away from your kids' emotions, and then be able to kind of rationally think them through, I think that can be really helpful. I also think, having a therapist like Julie Barron is a huge value add for a lot of kids. I think, parents are problem solvers, and some of us are very good problem solvers, and should try not to problem solve as much for our kids. I think parents tend to think they can figure out their own kid on their own. And I think while parents often know their kids better than anyone else, and they do, I think there's also such a value add for an outside point of view, and for the child, particularly an adolescent, to have a safe space to talk about everything that's going on in their minds. I mean, I say the same thing to my adult patients. If you can't afford it, and if you can access a therapist like Julie Barron or the adult equivalent, you're not a child, but the person who sees adults.
I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah. Then make use of that, because it's a place where you can download your thoughts, look at them with an objective or more objective eye, and then sort, categorize, catalog your thoughts and feelings, figure out how they drive your behaviors, and then how you feel. And that can be an enormous asset. I do see a lot of parents waiting a little too long, hesitating to call a therapist, because I don't know about you, but for me, I hear all the time, and I've been, a victim of this myself, thinking, what, I don't want to medicalize this. I don't want to make it seem like it's too big of a deal. How do I bring it up with my kid that I think they need to be in therapy? I don't want to make them seem like they're the problem, there's something wrong with them.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions? I mean, I can tell you what I tell my patients, but tell me what you tell your families who are tiptoeing around the idea of getting their kid into therapy, but don't know what to say.
So let me say this about therapy with adolescents. And this is when people will call me and say, my kid needs to be in therapy. They don't want to be in therapy. They don't. So it really depends on their willingness and the severity of what's happening. So there's 2 things that when I tell people, it's not a choice to be in therapy, and that's if there are safety concerns. If your child is doing something that's harmful to themselves, or having unsafe thoughts, or that needs treatment.
Right.
And the second is significant impact on functioning.
Yep.
What does that mean? Okay, so every single one of us have a kid who's barricaded in a room right now, who have, all of us who have teenagers, including me. I get home from work and I knock on the door and I have this, like, my son is like, Mom, you have to stop this. But I'm like, I just do this and I'm like, saying his name.
Anyone alive? Yeah.
He opens the door and he's like, stop knocking. What do you want, Mom?
Right.
I just want to see your face. That's it.
Yeah.
I just want to see your face. And I want you to come out for dinner and I want you to walk around the house a little bit. So, like, I feel your presence and, they all want to be barricaded in a room, but it's problematic if they're really shut down and they're not engaging with the family and they're not engaging with friends online and they're not getting outside a little bit and not moving. And so and they're not doing the schoolwork that they need to do, that is something that is more concerning. So I would say, yes, if they're willing to talk to a therapist, great, but it's not helpful to force them until or unless they're at a point where either safety or functioning is a real concern.
I think, so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would also add that there's a lot of natural resources of other adults that we can use with our kids, aunts and uncles and friends of the family and grandparents. And, it does take a village. Like, we all need, other adults to help impact and influence our kids. And so we can utilize that as well.
I think it's true. You definitely don't want to make therapy a threat, right? You don't want to say, if you don't, get your act together, then I'm, dragging you into therapy. Or even, something lighter, like, I'm concerned about you. I think you should be in therapy, and the kid doesn't want to. And you say, well, you know what? I think you have to, because therapy should be, in my mind, something that you might talk about in a positive way as an opportunity that when your kid is ready, knows that you're open to the conversation. I think a lot of kids in this day and age, whether they themselves are already in therapy or they have a friend in therapy, they understand the concept.
Yeah.
So I think the key for parents is to let them know that to let your child or adolescent know that you are open to the idea, because it's an added resource. Just like, trying to get a good sleep at night, trying to eat 3 square meals, trying to get movement, therapy is just another tool.
Yeah.
And so if you can kind of demystify it as something that isn't, a sign of someone being sick or, a problem child, then that's the first step. And then if your kid wants to do it, then that's even better.
Right.
And
also it may have to be offered multiple times. You may have to come back to it, right? So I always say, like, parenting is a long game. So if you think that your kid is at some point is going to need some help, just in terms of like, I could see how this is could become more problematic. You want to plant seeds that will grow, and you want to continue to provide offerings that, might build, and at some point they might come to a realization and take you up on it.
Julie, what are you telling kids who are anxious in particular or blue about the upcoming unstructured summer? Well, it's a big topic right now, particularly as we're facing the new month and it's past Memorial Day. I mean, what are you telling kids?
It's okay. So the first thing is, it's not easy. And also, just as a caveat, as like a larger umbrella statement, as parents, we need to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. We have to be good enough right now. Good enough is good enough. That is what we're aiming for, I'm
just going to take that home with me today and just like make that my mantra.
Yeah.
Because really, I come home from work and the kids are in their rooms. I knock on the door. They're like, oh, Mom, I see them briefly at dinner. And sometimes dinner is like a 7-minute, sort of in and out. Everyone's doing their own thing. It's hard to read the mood in the room when you have that short of a time. But I am sort of checking in my mind, like, okay, does he seem, forlorn, or did he smile? Did he tell me that he did his homework? Have I gotten a notice from the school? Anyway,
Lucy, I'm going to just tell you, if your kid sits down with you for 7 minutes for dinner and then says, thanks, Mom, for dinner, it's a win. That is
thank you. And I'm not going to say it's 7 minutes every day. I'm going to say it's maybe a couple times a week. But the point is, that we have to give ourselves a break as parents and know that good enough is good enough. Kids are extremely resilient, and they're almost more resilient, I would argue, than adults are. And so they are, if they have unconditional love, if they have food and they have shelter, which of course not every kid does have, but if they have those
no
things,
kidding,
then they're already doing pretty darn well.
exactly.
And if parents can tell themselves that they're enough and, model sort of calm, fact following, one day at a time, behavior, then you're already, I think,
you're
at
ahead.
an advantage. Yeah.
Yeah. But let me go back to your question on the summer.
Summer, please.
So this is really a big thing. And I just want to say, like, the way I've been thinking about how we're coping kind of collectively, I've been trying to sort of take a step back and week to week kind of get a read of, like, theme wise, where are people? And, so we had those first 2 weeks at the end of March where it was like, okay, we're shut down for 2 weeks. And we were sort of anticipating going back. And as we got closer to the end of that 2 week mark, we realized we probably weren't going back. And so it was like in this holding pattern. People didn't know what to do. So that's when I sort of wrote this blog on restructuring, #restructuring, because kids didn't know what to do with their time. And kids who are programmed and hyper function and used to external structures, guiding them, they were at a total loss. So it was about helping them, put some structure in their day, actually not stay up till 3 or 4 a.m. and sleep till 3 in the afternoon. And
that.
Right. Keep it sort of, we're not asking them to get up at 7 or 8, but I think if your kid is getting to sleep somewhere between midnight 1-ish around and waking up somewhere between 10 and 11, like,
that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the first 2 weeks. Then school started back up, and then they settled into a rhythm. And so then there was this external thing that structured them, that kept them kind of, in some sort of rhythm. And then we started to get through, like, I started to see in the last couple of weeks as schools are wrapping up, people thinking ahead more and looking towards the summer. And we are in this, especially like between a little bit before like May 15th, when there was May 15th for a lot of states was a marker in terms of, okay, here's what we're going to do differently a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
June 1st is another marker for some states where they're going to lift some more restrictions, and we'll see kind of state by state what that looks like. But there was all this uncertainty, and like all the kids who go to sleepaway camp, it's the last week or so that, I had one of my clients who I got on the video call with them, and they're sobbing, and they were like, my camp just made the call 5 minutes ago, like right before I got on with you. And they're like, they knew it was coming, but it still hits you like a Mack truck.
And it's that grief, it's that loss, it's that it's like you had this little thing to look forward to,
right?
And it's now poof and gone. And not only is it gone, you're looking down the barrel of a very long summer with no structure, when, as you said, kids are so used to being programmed and structured.
Right. And so now we're in this, like, I feel like maybe a week or so ago, it was a little bit of like a lot of uncertainty in that sort of like, I'm not really sure how to even pivot or what direction we're going to be going in. And so, when you're sort of floating in this uncertainty, it's really hard and it's really anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
Now I feel like we're settling in a little bit more to the reality of what summer is probably going to look like. And so now we have to kick into gear and start doing the problem solving and the, how are we going to #restructure our summers? And I think that there will be places that have online kinds of things. I'm finding that a lot of the college kids, a lot of my college age clients have decided that they're just going to take classes over the summer and rack up more credits because it'll get them closer to graduation, and they can, they may as well do that if they're stuck. And, so that's great. Right. but a lot of the, and there are some degree of internships that are still happening because they can happen remotely, but many in-person internships got like squashed. So I really have been thinking a lot about this, and I think that we are going to have to get very creative about natural resources. Natural resources meaning our existing support networks and communities, right? So, you know, I've been talking to my teenage clients about finding something that they really enjoy or feel good at and offering to do something in that realm with younger kids in their neighborhood, right? So like most neighborhoods have a listserv, and you can, you know, not just even babysitting, but like different flavors of babysitting, right? So like being able to sit, if you're a musician, being able to schedule a few times a week with some kids to have an hour of their musical instrument practice with a teenager who it's like more fun to do that with, because how many parents are nagging their kids to practice their instrument, right? Or
right.
doing something like just backyard play and games with siblings or neighbors, like smaller groups in a backyard where the teenager comes over and like does games for an hour, you know, a few days a week. Or
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
it's sort of like going back. I mean, just like you were saying, there's some, I'm not sure, I hesitate to call it a silver lining because it's obviously a terrible time, but one of the silver linings is sort of going back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
And right in the old days, you know, even when you and I were growing up, like I didn't drive to the soccerplex for a soccer game. I played in my backyard or at the neighborhood park. And my babysitters were my neighbors. And it was just much more simple. And in a way, it offers, I mean, if you will, an opportunity for, you know, neighborhoods to come together and, as you said, use natural resources.
Right.
The challenge, of course, is convincing your kids to do that. And, you know, how do you do that? That's really a challenge in and of itself. But I think you're right to make use of outdoor space,
yep,
local parks, things that you naturally have at your fingertips, like the ability to entertain a younger kid if you're a teenager, or the ability to play an instrument, and, you know, do the best you can.
Yeah, and so to your question about how do we get our teenagers to do some of these things?
Yeah.
So boredom is really a powerful force. Teenagers do not like to be bored. And so, you know, when they start talking about how boring the summer is going to be, and, you know, help them brainstorm, and we can't do it for them. We can't choreograph it for them. We have to help elicit it from them. Because if you don't have a willing participant and somebody, especially with teenagers, they need to feel self-efficacy. They need to feel a sense of control over their own lives. And so we need to help, consult them on them and them figure it out, you know, with some suggestions and some, you know, let me know what I can do to help. Like, if I can help you find some resources, I will. What about this? How about that? Have you thought of, you know, X, Y, or Z? I think we just have to, and again, they may not all come to fruition, but we can really just try to guide them.
And as you said earlier, plant the seed.
Exactly. And also the other thing that is really motivating is purpose and meaning. So if you can help them find their purpose and meaning, right? So there's clients that I have that are, one of my clients this week is like, do you want to hear about the business I'm starting? I was like, yes, I want to hear about it. Like, you know, and they're like, there's innovation happening.
Yeah.
So
here's a question, Julie, that's coming in that I think is a really good one. And I'd love to hear it for my own kids' sake. How do you handle teens that spend way too much time on screens?
Mm-hmm.
You know, right now they're obligated to for school, but screens, as we know, was a problem well before the pandemic. And, you know, how do you get, I mean, let's talk about screen time in general, and how do you get your kid off screens? Because of course, one way to avoid being bored ever is to be on screens 24/7. And how do you navigate that, particularly when there's nothing else to do at the moment?
So I'm going to say something that might be controversial.
Oh, bring it. Bring it.
As parents, I think we have to forget everything we have been taught about screen time at this point.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear what you're going to say.
I don't think the goal is to get them entirely off screens. I think they're going to be on screens. It's the only way that I have boys. My boys have indentations in their hair from headsets. And,
oh my gosh, mine probably have the parallel ones. Maybe they're talking to each other.
Right. I know. Like they walk out and my one son has like this big curly head of hair and there's like this indentation of like the head.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So keep going. I'm interested in this controversial.
Okay. So it's a little bit of like when you work with people on substance abuse or things that are like not good for them, and we talk about harm reduction, that's our goal. Our goal is harm reduction. It's not to get them to stop or get off. This is how they're connected to the world right now. And if you take that away, it's just not going to be pretty. It really is not going to be pretty. So what I would suggest instead is, first of all, protect sleep hours. I am a big proponent that sleep is fundamental and foundational. And so, and I preach to my kids and they know like that's my hard line. So I'm not going to get in a battle about a lot of things, but I really want to protect sleep time, and I'm on them about not shifting their sleep cycle so that day is night and night is day. That is just not going to be good and healthy for them.
Yeah, and actually one of the people who, can you hear me? My internet is not so
I can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
So one of the readers wrote in particularly about sleep. Like, so do you have like a no phones in their room kind of rule, or what do you recommend on that?
No, I'm going to wake you up at a certain time in the morning. And if you can't get yourself up and out of bed, we're going to have a problem. And I might have to put on some restrictions.
So I think it also depends on the kid, right? There's some kids who are naturally like moths to flame with screens, and some kids I think who, as you know, who are kind of like, if you will, like self-medicating and sort of escaping. Yeah. And I do agree with you that it is the way they socialize. It's sort of part of their DNA at this point, and to take it away entirely is sort of, cruel in some ways. But I also think, as my friend Dijon Anderson is pointing out, I do think you have to give them alternatives, and I think you have said that. Right. You're not saying just let them be on screens and let their brains rot. You're saying, work on the harm or the harm reduction, give them alternatives, and then set some boundaries when needed.
Correct, absolutely. And so the way, there's a couple things. I sidetracked to the sleep because that is the one thing that you want to be protective of, and there are ways to. And from a parenting standpoint, I'm a believer in offering choices and saying, here's where my hard line is. Let's have a conversation about this. This is what I'm really concerned about. I don't unilateral decisions on changing your kid in some way usually backfire. And so, having an honest and open conversation about what you're concerned about and why, and where your own bottom line is. So every kid is different, and we as parents are all different, and where we feel our own lines and limits is also important. And so we have to be true to our own lines and limits and know our kids. So all of that, you have to take that into consideration. There is no like across the board rule. I just think
of course,
adaptable. And so you want to make sure that your kids are getting, that their sleep is protected in terms of some degree of regularity. And then the other part that is involved in harm reduction is adding other things into their day. So like if you're focused on what to put in that's not screen, you're not just telling them not to be on screens and to get off screens, but plugging in other things, right? So if they are now working with some kids in the neighborhood, or they've taken on a new fitness routine, or they found an internship they can do online, or they decided to take a summer class, or, that also presumably would be online at this point. But do you see what I mean? You plug other things.
I think you're right. It's basically also going back to your original point, is focusing on the positive, because I could spend all day like on, when I'm home on the weekends, for example, like nagging people about screens. But I found that instead of just nagging, I'm going to try to fill the space with other things, not overfill it, but offer other ideas. And I I have 3 kids. They all have very different relationships to screens. And so, like for today, for example, we just found out today that the summer camp where my boys have gone for a combined 18 years up in Maine, where they are both supposed to work this summer, actually make money and be kitchen staff and, help, corral young campers, has been canceled.
Yeah.
So probably not tonight because I don't want to make it a deadline, but we'll talk about it, I'm sure, tonight. But over the weekend, we're going to sit down and have a little family meeting. It's going to maybe be 1 kid at a time, and it's not going to be formal or organized or have like PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to tell you right there. But I'm just going to say it might be 2 seconds, as we're passing on the way to the kitchen. But I am going to try to have a conversation about, okay, let's now that we know that that's not happening and we're facing like 3 solid months of like empty space, let's figure out some things to fill the time that are going to feel purposeful and meaningful and that you enjoy. Like the goal is not to punish you. The goal is not to overschedule you, nor is it for you to become a professional babysitter or, chef. It's rather to just give you some ideas and then just revisit it, beat the proverbial dead horse on what you expect. And also, as you said, like there's certain non-negotiables in our family. Like there's certain you have to participate in family chores to some extent, and there are some basic rules. You have to, be polite. I mean, I'm not saying these things always happen, but you cannot be on screens 24/7. You have to have this much amount of sleep. And so if the kids know what your non-negotiables are, then everything else is just do the best you can. And sometimes the bar has to be lowered.
Agreed. And also what you're doing is you're watching, I always say kind of watch what their actions are. If you are finding that your kid is on screens, 14 hours a day and you never see them, or when you do see them, they're irritable and active and that's not their usual, something's got to change. Something to be addressed. And so that's when you have a conversation and you say, here's what I'm noticing and here's what I think is contributing. And we have to come up with something. You can help me come up with it. Let's work on it together. Let's try to figure something out, because teens are really good problem solving partners. If you can engage them in those kinds of discussions and come up with something, but then you do okay, well, we can try that. And if that, we're going to revisit it in a couple of weeks. And if it's not working, then we're going to move to this. But I think when they can see it coming, then they get to make a choice. And what are we really trying to help our kids learn and do is decision making, right? And understanding the parameters, the boundaries, the lines where there are checkpoints, and then making decisions within.
That's right.
Yeah.
Julie, another question that's coming up is how we're trying to, myself, I'm trying to kind of make it through the end of the day, make it through the end of the week. Same with my kids. I'm now going to start thinking about summer a bit more now that our one thing we had, which was my kids' jobs in Maine for 3 weeks, is gone. We're going to start thinking about the summer. What about, are your clients and your own kids asking you about the fall? A question came up about what are you telling kids about the fall and going back to school, and how do you even broach that with patients? Are they even asking about it? Are they not yet?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're all wondering and waiting, and as we are wondering and waiting. And I that really goes back to the uncertainty piece. It's like we really can only look so far ahead of ourselves without the information that we need to know what will be. And so, we can talk about what we're hearing and what might be potentially just what's being discussed. So it doesn't, we're not ignoring it and then it hits us out of nowhere. But that's really the extent.
I think that's right.
We have well, here are some of the options I've been hearing about. I don't know what it's going to look like. There could be some kind of hybrid. There could be some kind of, and college is different from high school, is different from middle school, is different, and private school and public school. We don't know. We just,
right. I think it goes back to your good points about, being in the moment, and sort of offering hope, but also being comfortable with the uncertainty and validating the feelings that your kid has and that you have yourself of not loving uncertainty, and just kind of being with it and sitting with it and tolerating that level of distress.
That's right.
If I look back on, if I look back personally back to mid-March, remember when like, I think we all remember like the last thing we did, like the last, you know, moment you went to like your hairdresser, or the last moment, or whatever you're doing, like the week before, like the proverbial poop hit the fan.
Like March 13th when I had my last mani-pedi, you mean like that?
Yeah, it's sort of like, where were you when JFK was shot or something like that, or where were you when 9/11 happened? So, but I think back to that moment in time, and I think about all the things I was worrying about, all the uncertainty, and I think about all that energy I spent kind of worrying, because I'm wired to worry. I'm wired to protect my kids. I'm wired for survival. I'm human. I also happen to specialize in anxiety, but I've trained myself not to be so much. You know, all that energy was, you know, part of it is natural, being worried in a crisis, but what I try to remind myself is that some of it was so unnecessary, because again, who could have predicted back in March where we are right now?
Yeah.
We could not have predicted then. So
well, this is why, this is like when people worry too far in advance.
Right.
You don't even know that that's going to happen. Like 10,000 things could happen between that would change the outcome. So what are we spending the energy?
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is it's not rational, but I think if you can tell yourself, you know, like they do in AA, which, you know, I think the 12-step program applies to anybody trying to make a change in their lives, whether it's giving up alcohol or just trying to be more present. You know, it's just one day at a time. Like, do the best you can today. And honestly, right now you have to, because, you know, where I sit in the medical field, things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
So for example, when a patient today asked me if, you know, in the fall, her kid should be wearing a face shield when she goes back to kindergarten so she could see the smiles on her I said, you know what? I think it's a good question, but I think let's just focus on today.
That's right. It's a great question.
It's a great question.
There isn't an answer.
But there's no answer to it. And the beauty of time is that time gives us a lot of information. The beauty of the last 10 weeks, of course, there's been horror. There's been 100,000 lives lost in the United States alone. But the beauty of the last 10 weeks is we have learned so very much about the virus. We've learned so much about how to prevent it, the possible treatments, the possible vaccine. And we've learned about our own human behaviors and how effective it can be when we join together and socially distance and wear masks. And we've learned, I think, as individuals, what matters to us most. I mean, one of the best parts of my job right now, particularly when I'm dealing with some of my patients who are very sick, either with coronavirus or other things, you know, are drilling down into their deepest selves and realizing what matters to them most. Like, yes, they loved getting a mani-pedi, but what they really, really want is to be with their grandchildren more than anything. That's what they live for.
Right.
And so it's an opportunity to reflect on what matters to us most, and it's an opportunity for kids to do that as well. At the same time, I'm not going to lie and say that my kids are sitting around like pondering the meaning of life and what makes them happy and what makes them not. But I think the point is that it is a moment where we absolutely have to be in the present, and being in the present is where we should be anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is to jump too far ahead is to cause suffering.
That's it.
I mean, like what we talked about earlier, if you can't do anything with it,
right,
there's not. And also your point about sort of like when we're in this emotional headspace, it's really hard to remind ourselves. But once we can catch our breath, it is helpful to remind ourselves that time heals and time helps and time changes, so that we don't know 6 months from now exactly what things will look like. So does it make sense to worry about that right now? And then we're like, oh, no, I guess I could put that on the shelf, you know?
Right. It can be actually very liberating, right? Like I will get myself into a little lather thinking, oh my God, like if Henry, my oldest, doesn't go to college, like, you know, what is he going to do? And, you know, and then I'm like, you know what? I have no control over that process. And you know what? Every day is new and different, and we'll deal with that when it comes. I mean, there's plenty of time to worry. Like, we all have plenty of brain space for it. So just save it for when you actually need it.
And it goes back to what you said earlier, Lucy, about resilience, and kids are really resilient.
They are.
You know, I have been saying to this generation, you know, to whoever will listen to me, of my clients and my own kids, like, I really think this generation is going to get us out of a lot of the crap we're in terms of climate, in terms of, I mean, look at from Parkland and the gun control and the impact. And at the time that happened, I was like, you know what? If there's anybody that's going to be hurt, it's going to be these teenagers.
Yeah, they are the generation that is, you know, I mean, you know, our generation, you know, you and I haven't experienced, you know, war or, you know, sort of like a major, you know, global trauma like that. Of course, every single day there is tragedy and trauma everywhere you look. But this generation in the United States is hopefully going to get from this some tools for resilience, and that will carry them through and help them make decisions that will better each and every one of us. I mean, as we know, there's so many problems in this country that have been laid bare in this time. There are too many to even talk about, but I want to, and I do, with, you know, my friends and my family and my patients and whenever I have the chance. But I'm hopeful that this generation of kids, their eyes are wide open to the serious systemic problems we have in this country, from, you know, the way the coronavirus is affecting people along racial lines in such amazingly horrific ways, to the way healthcare is not being delivered to the average American, to the disparities there, to, you know, the climate situation that we have been dealing with that now is even more evident. And I think this generation, with the resilience that they're hopefully going to get from getting through this, and we will get through it, they're going to be to make the changes. I mean, I would like to be part of it as well, of course, but I do think our kiddos
and they're talking about it. They are talking about it, you know, and it's like you know, we would never have wished this, but just like anything that's trauma or grief stricken, what's that last stage? Finding meaning and pulling meaning, from it and moving forward. And we know from history that some of the biggest social and cultural changes and shifts have come out of huge tragedies, you know, the back end of wars and the Great Depression and all of these things that create and you know, spawn innovation. And, you know, we have to use the opportunities of the now to move forward when we get through all of this.
And one of the things that you and I have talked about before today is this culture of hyper-functioning that we live in, particularly in urban areas like Washington, D.C., where, you know, kids are playing, you know, sports on the weekends and taking an instrument and taking 5 APs and achieving, or trying to. And schools are piling on more extracurriculars, more work, and parents are under a lot of pressure. You and I were talking about the potential to really see what matters to us and how a culture of hyper-functioning and over-functioning is completely unhealthy. It's not to say that your kid doesn't like playing on travel soccer or that your AP physics class isn't worthwhile, but I think it's an opportunity to think about, you know, finding a better balance between, you know,
100%.
being in the present, being in the moment, and having the brain space to know what you like in the first place. Before you sign up for travel soccer, do you even like soccer to begin with? Do you know what I mean? I think it's an opportunity. And I think parents need to take note of what this time is affording us. Because if you can take away some of the worry and focus on what we can do to make our lives different when we're all back to normal and some version of it, that's an awesome thing we can think about.
Huge. And I really, really hope that we get to a better place of balance, because you know, I mean, I wouldn't have as many kids in my office, to be quite honest, which would be good, because they're so anxious and they have to plug in time for their therapy session, because part of our therapy session is, can you help me plan my schedule for next year and like help me decide what classes I'm going to take? And this is like the ritual it's really like in January now, where they're looking at the next year's schedule, right? And inevitably these words come into the conversation over and over and over. But I have to. And I'm like, you have to? What do you want to do? And they look at me like puzzled.
Yeah, like they don't have a choice at
Should
all.
not look at us puzzled when we ask them what they actually want, what's actually meaningful to them. You know, this is like, it's just driven, prescribed. We're trying to get to a prescribed outcome instead of what is your authentic path and where does that land you? So
I think it's so important, and I think it's also up to the parents. You know, the teenagers now are the future of the planet and the world, but we're still the parents right now, and so it's up to us, I think, to help redefine what our culture looks like. Is our culture one where hyper functioning and achievement for the sake of achievement is rewarded, or are we rewarded for thinking about what makes us feel worthy and valuable and happy? Not that we have to be happy all the time. Happiness all the time is, you know, pathologic. But to have the space to think about what gives us meaning, what gives us purpose, and what makes us feel like a valuable member of society. And I think that right now we're just kind of driving ourselves a little nuts.
I agree. I think there's a real value in helping our kids find their own authenticity. And, you know, sometimes they have to struggle through feeling conflicted about something, or wondering, or not feeling sure, or let me try this, but no, that wasn't really it. And then we're like, you can't quit, you know, like you have to do the same thing for 4 years because colleges like to see a pattern. One thing that really, I mean, this is the have to culture.
It's the have to culture.
Really have to start questioning this have to culture. It's not healthy.
I think that's right. Well, Julie, it's 4 o'clock. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and people, I'm sure, have lots and lots of more questions. But maybe we do this again in the summer, in the hot dog days of summer. Maybe we revisit. You know,
I'm sure there'll be a whole new set of challenges that
we'll have a whole new set of challenges. Some of the themes will be the same, right? Being in the present, radical acceptance of the thing we can't control, knowing the difference between what we can control and what we can't, and letting go of stuff we can't control. Being good enough, letting your kids find their way with a little help of their parents. I look at my job, I don't know if this makes sense, but as like, you know, those like duck pin bowling alley, like where I'm like the bumpers along the side, I'm the guardrails. Like I'm there so they don't like, you know, get into, you know, deep doo-doo, but basically I'm just I'm feeding them, loving them, nurturing them, educating them, and hoping the freaking best.
Right.
And that's all I can do.
That's it.
And so I think it'd be fun to meet again in the summer and see where we are. And I hope that you'll join me. And in the meantime, thanks for being such a gift to your patients and for spending an hour of your precious time.
This is, you know, I love chatting about this, and thank you so much for inviting me to do so. And it was great to be with you.
Super fun. All right, Julie Barron, thanks so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.